All right, political science class, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off on lesson 27 for unit 5 here. By popular demand, I was told that I should be in the video actually to try and make it a little bit more engaging. So we're going to change it up a little bit from the way the previous videos have been made. However, still going through the same content to catch you guys up on YouTube here, okay? So where we left off was talking about the difference between positive rights and negative rights. Remember, positive rights are rights that the government has to provide for you as a citizen. Uh-oh, let's exit out of this. Okay, so, like I was saying, positive rights require government to act in specific ways. So, some different positive rights the government has to provide for people. Rights to receive certain services such as protection against criminals, or aggression from foreign nations. So those are positive rights. The government has to provide a military service to protect you from any foreign invaders. They also have to protect you against criminals that break the law. Thus we have federal prison systems and things like that in order to lock people up. That's a positive right. That's something the government provides for us. Food, housing, and medical care are positive rights. Should the government provide these for people? According to the Affordable Care Act, a minimal standard of health care is required to be provided. It is that the government's responsibility to pay for that. We've already kind of agreed at the federal level that providing health assistance for the elderly is a necessity through Medicare. That's a positive right that's been provided for those people. And the 6th and 7th Amendments provide very important positive rights for American citizens. That provides your right to a jury trial, and the right to an attorney, the right to a fair trial. Those are all things that are positive rights that the government must provide for you. So it requires the government to act. Negative rights were largely considered by the Founding Fathers as more important than positive rights, because most of them did believe in limited government and that we should limit the action of the government. So negative rights restrict actions of the government. Most rights in the Bill of Rights are actually negative rights. They prevent the federal government from acting in a certain way. So, for example, the First Amendment. The government cannot create laws respecting a religion. They cannot limit your freedom of speech, your freedom to assemble. Those are things that the government can't take away from you. So that makes it a negative right. It restricts the government from acting. Okay? And some other negative rights that may be listed in the Constitution. The Second Amendment right. Okay? It prevents the government from acting and taking away your firearms. The Third Amendment, it restricts the government from allowing them to quarter soldiers in your home. Most of the rights outlined there are actually restricting the government from acting. It restricts the government from using cruel and unusual punishment on people. It restricts the federal government to create any laws not outlined in the Constitution with the 9th and 10th. It reserves those rights to the states and to the people. So most of the rights in the Bill of Rights are actually negative rights. It restricts the government from acting instead of providing rights or providing something for the people. Okay? All right. Next, we're going to talk about what kind of rights does the Bill of Rights actually end up protecting. It's more complicated than you may think. So like, for example, the Second Amendment states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does that mean? Okay? Is this a positive right or a negative right? I did say that it was a negative right earlier, but then it also states that being necessary to the security of a free state. So it also kind of says that it's a positive right that we need to have a free state. It's the right of the people to keep and bear arms that shall not be infringed. But it's in order to form a well-regulated militia. It's complicated to figure out exactly what they mean by that. Also going back to the First Amendment and looking at your freedom of religion. Most people just assume you have freedom of religion. You can do whatever you want with religion. Well, it gets more complicated than that, because you have the right to a freedom to practice whatever religion you want. However, it just says that they can't create laws that respect a religion, the Establishment Clause. So therefore, it is a little more complicated than you may think about what rights are protected within your Bill of Rights. is a right no matter what else is going on in the country? This is a complicated question as well, because in certain Supreme Court cases, like the District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008, it struck down a ban on handguns in Washington, D.C. in a 5-4 vote. So you can see that, you have the right to bear arms, but you have the right to bear nuclear weapons. You have the right to freedom of speech, but you can't go up and threaten somebody with their life and then, actually follow through with that and expect that your freedom of speech should be upheld. So you have to understand that you have certain rights, but those rights can be twisted and limited in some ways, all right? Like the Third Amendment. If someone were to invade the United States, like in the War of 1812, soldiers could be stationed in your home. And that's not against the law. That is a part of the responsibility of an American citizen to help protect our country if we were to be invaded, okay? All right, let's keep going here. What are the meaning and importance of the 9th and 10th Amendment? They're both really vague, right? They don't outline specific rights for people, okay? So for example, the 9th Amendment says, any rights not listed in the Constitution cannot be denied to the people. A simple way of saying that could be not list all the rights, all right? So it confirms that the Bill of Rights doesn't increase power to the national government, or at least that's what the philosophy was with including the 9th Amendment, is that if it's not in the Constitution, you can't deny it to the people. So this goes back to Alexander Hamilton's concern of providing too much power when you give a Bill of Rights, because now you're outlining what rights people have. So if it's not in there, can't those rights be denied? Okay? It forces Congress and the courts to affirm rights not mentioned in the future. So if there are rights, like McKerr versus Maryland, a national bank, do states have the right to tax a national bank if that bank is located within their state? The Supreme Court said, no, you don't have that right, because it's necessary and proper to have a national bank in order to regulate national finances and things like that. And you may disagree with that, but that's just one example, okay? 10th Amendment, okay? Rights are not listed for the federal government or denied to the states, are reserved for the states or to the people. So it kind of reiterates the 9th Amendment, that if it's not in the Constitution, it's reserved to the states. So for example, murder is not illegal in the Constitution, but it is illegal in all 50 states. That's a right that they left up to the states. You can argue other issues as well, such as gay marriage. That's not outlined in the Constitution. It doesn't define what marriage is. So every state has been left up to define what marriage is. And federal courts have started to overturn bans on same-sex marriage in Alaska, and even Indiana, Wisconsin. A lot of states have actually had their ban on same-sex marriage uplifted. You can't do that according to a federal court. Now that's not the Supreme Court, so we'll see if the Supreme Court ever takes on this case to decide if that's a federal government issue or if that should be a state government issue. But according to the 10th Amendment, if it's not outlined there, it's not in the Constitution, they don't have the right to act on it federally. But remember, our 14th Amendment really expands that federal power by applying the Bill of Rights to the states. Lastly here, this protects the powers of the states against national government. However, we have seen the growth and expansion of national government and how it actually ends up expanding federal power in a lot of ways. Okay. One of our last couple of slides here. What rights are protected in the body of the Constitution? I think this is a really interesting question, because in Federalist number 84, Alexander Hamilton argues that the Constitution itself is a Bill of Rights. So think for a second about what rights are actually outlined within the Constitution, okay? So the next question I have up here that we were going to discuss in class are what are some basic rights protected within that body? So, bills of attainder, right? You can't have a legislature punish somebody without due process of the law through the judicial branch. That is a right protected in the Constitution so that people can't just get arrested and punished by legislatures. That's a really good right to have within the body of the Constitution. We had that you didn't have to take any sort of religious test in order to hold public office. That's a form of freedom of religion. So that if you wanted to hold public office, nobody had to know what religion you actually had. Preventing ex post facto laws. was reserving the rights to people so that government can't become tyrannical and arresting people for prior actions that were not illegal. These are all rights reserved within the body of the Constitution that are very important. You can argue that allowing immunity from arrest on the floor of the House and the Senate is a form of freedom of speech, so that people can say whatever they want politically without being reprimanded by the executive or the Supreme Court based off of what they say in session. I think that's really noteworthy to say that you have freedom of speech as long as you're in the legislature and you're in session and not out of session. So it really, narrowly defines freedom of speech, but maybe that's what the founders actually wanted. They didn't want people to go out, rabble-rousers like Shays' Rebellion, getting people all riled up. They didn't necessarily want those things as well. So you see a shift in this later on throughout American history. All right, last slide here. How have attitudes about the Bill of Rights changed since 1791 when we started passing these? The first pass was the Federalists and Anti-Federalists were unhappy both. Madison, who was a Federalist, called it a nauseous project, trying to list the rights that people had in the United States and actually narrow it down. It's a difficult thing to ask of somebody to list the rights that people, millions of people, deserve to have within a brand new country. He was tasked with quite, a task here, I guess, for lack of a better word. In 1833, in Barron versus Baltimore, it was only applied to the national government, not the states. So we actually did say that the Bill of Rights does not apply to the states. So therefore, certain states could have state religions and limit people's rights to freedom of speech and things like that, because they specifically said that the Bill of Rights does not apply to the states. And of course, we've talked about this before with incorporation in the 14th Amendment. Supreme Court cases have begun incorporating the Bill of Rights to the states and their citizens so that you do have freedom of religion in every state. You can't be prohibited from that. Now, our founders would honestly probably be pretty upset about the 14th Amendment, thinking that the federal government has the power to enforce these in the states. But it's kind of silly to think about it at the same time to say and list, you have freedom of speech in the United States of America, but we're not actually going to enforce that. We're not going to make people follow that rule at the same time. So both ways, our founders really wanted a limited federal government so they couldn't force states to do things, but at the same time, if you're going to list it there, you have to be able to enforce it as well. So most people believe that the incorporation of the Bill of Rights has ended up being a good thing for the most part. The Bill of Rights today expresses much of influence and power that the founders intended. Does the fact that people do not know the contents of the Bill of Rights detract from its importance? So for example, a poll done recently, over 60% of Americans think that the right to vote is in your First Amendment, and only a tiny fraction of people know that the right to peaceably assemble and petition the government are part of your First Amendment rights. It says nothing about voting rights in your First Amendment. It says that you have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to assemble, freedom to petition the government, and freedom of religion. Those are your rights outlined in the First Amendment. Most Americans don't know that. Most Americans don't know that they have a right against cruel and unusual punishment. Most Americans don't know that in the 9th and 10th Amendment it limits the federal government to things that are outlined in the Constitution in the amendments. It doesn't grant them an unlimited amount of power. So people often think, well, the government should fix this problem. What's the government doing? Why is this government agency not functioning correctly? Well, in all actuality, the Founding Fathers would have not intended for those things to happen. They wanted states and communities to try and solve these issues. But in today's growing world and technology expanding, maybe that's not as realistic to ask of small communities and states anymore. Maybe we need a bigger government to try and solve problems like the current Ebola problem. These are things that maybe the federal government needs to address and states wouldn't be able to appropriately handle. Okay, that's it for lesson number 27. Also, happy Columbus Day.